This all together, so thank you so much for all the effort. It's really appreciate it. I'm Josh Sandler. I'm a co-president of the Africa Business Club, and on behalf of the club, we're very excited for you all to be here today, and we look forward to working with you throughout this, your admissions prospect in any capacity that we could be of help. Dan Kaplan, who you met earlier, is pretty core to that, so feel free to reach out to him, and I'll ask him for his email address, ask him for his contact details, and he'll be very helpful, and we will be helpful as well. I'd like to, I'll present some folks being on the panel. Amaka. Amaka is class of 2014. You can, I guess.
Introduce myself. So class of 2014, I actually know a couple of you from London, so waving at all of you. Currently work at McKinsey, technically in Boston, but I live in New York. Prior to that was at Merrill Lynch in London as well, originally Nigerian, by way of England.
Hi everybody, my name is Irene Sun. I am a joint degree HBS in Harvard Kennedy School of Government student. I'm in my third year, graduating in May of this year. My connection to Africa is that as an undergraduate here, I studied African history, and then I taught for a year in Namibia, and also worked at McKinsey in Lagos for a year.
So a few others have been delayed from train situations, so they're arriving shortly, and hopefully they can. We'll bring them into the panel. But I think what we're thinking about starting off is having a more informal conversation, allowing you guys to really ask about questions, our thought process for applying to HBS and how HBS treated us, and then from I think each one of us will say just a bit about that, and then we'll go from there and ask more general questions, and allow everyone to ask their questions. So, I'll stand casually in the back. No worries. So maybe you guys could just talk a bit about why you applied initially to HBS, like what drove you towards business school application, and why not Kennedy School? Actually, to add, we're both joint degrees with Kennedy School, which I highly recommend as well. And we're happy to discuss more about that. But why business school and why HBS?
So for me, did my undergrad in England, and I was a banker for a couple of years. Did it during the financial crisis, which was a tough time, but I think really pushed me to reflect as you see people leaving. What is it that you actually want to do for your long-term career? So this is great training, but what type of leader do you want to be, particularly when you see people leaving and not necessarily being looked after by the leaders in your company. You start thinking about how is it that I could carve a career that's a little bit more meaningful than what is ahead of me for the next few years. So I did 3 years of banking, was on track to become an associate, but really felt, particularly having been a medical student before I went into banking, that this really wasn't my passion, and I really needed to understand business a little bit more than the numbers and the modeling. And business school was the best way to do that. So I had a couple of mentors who'd been to business school, had been to HBS in particular, and could really advocate for it. Having had the English education system as well really wrote into you that you only speak when asked and only speak when you have something valuable to say. I could see the difference also in my American colleagues who could speak at any point, ad lib, and really own a room. And I felt that coming to somewhere like HBS would really push me in that respect. So again, I guess the advice of all my immediate mentors, not the longer-term American ones, I decided to apply. Interesting process again, started really pushing me out of my comfort zone, and really, really loved every experience and interaction I had at HBS. So I started by coming to the conference actually 5 years ago. This is my 5th conference and hopefully my last, because I feel like I'm getting a bit old. Every conference has had its own gem, including the one that I ran. Amazing. I started by coming to the conference and really getting to know different HBS students, and the vibe I got was that by coming to HBS, they really had gone through an experience and it had become part of them. So it wasn't a case of just going and learning, what's on paper, but it really was something that they were taking with them throughout their career. Having been 2 years out of HBS, I would actually say that's true. So the people that I see in London, in Lagos, on the West Coast are all from HBS. The people that I see at McKinsey, ironically, are often from HBS. I have tons of colleagues in Japan at any point who will be messaging me at night. But I really feel that HBS is an experience that will help me grow in my career, not only for those 2 years, but going through the 20 years, 30 years forward. And I think some of it is that you really develop a set of peers who are also thinking about becoming amazing leaders in whatever field that they are going. going into. So that's my rationale, and that's kind of a little bit of what I've enjoyed so far.
For me, it was actually a little bit of a different rationale. Out of college, I taught in Namibia for a year, which really sparked a lot of questions in my mind about not just developing countries in Africa, but developing countries overall. And then I joined McKinsey and focused on economic development and international development. And I was there for almost 5 years. And really the reason I came to graduate school was I got really curious about one aspect of it in particular that I wanted to take time out and study, which is what the heck are Chinese people doing in Africa? Because everywhere I went on the continent, there was just all these Chinese people, and I would talk to them. And the clients I was serving, who were supposed to be, you know, the top and the most powerful organizations in global development, had no clue what this meant and what was happening. And so I felt like at a certain point I needed to stop asking questions and start trying to answer them for myself. And McKinsey was not a way to do that. I mean, you're working like 70 hours a week. And so that's why I decided to take time out and go to graduate school. And for me, the combination of the business school and the Kennedy School was really important because I felt like this was an issue, a topic, a trend that really crossed between and involved both the public and the private sector. And so for me, when I thought about graduate schools, it was really important to look at entire universities with the resources across multiple issue areas that I was really invested in and interested in. And obviously for me, that was the Kennedy School of Government and Harvard Business School, both incredibly strong institutions with incredible networks, incredible academics and research. But that's also set in a larger university where there's a lot of perspectives, a lot of resources, and a lot of connections to be made that would be really helpful to me as I learned about this topic. And so, you know, unlike a lot of students here, I came here with a very specific question in mind. And to sort of my surprise, I thought it was pretty risky coming here with such a specific question. But I found a lot of resources, especially at HBS, that has been really encouraging of students doing independent research. So I've been taking independent projects one-on-one with professors I really respect. I've been writing a lot, thinking a lot, meeting a lot of people. And so I think there's ways to think about your HBS experience beyond kind of the standard professionally oriented two-year experience.
And to that extent, can you guys discuss a bit more what differentiates Harvard from other institutions in terms of its relationship with Africa and its focus on Africa, both where it does very well and where there's still room to be done?
So Harvard or Harvard Business School?
Yeah, both.
So I'll talk about the business school because that's what I know. I think for me, the big differentiator between Harvard and the other business schools was really the depth and support of the alumni base that we have. So I think HBS was one of the earliest to start having African students come by, and you'll find some of them who are alum of like 1969 or something crazy when you weren't born, who still remember their 2 years really fondly and will speak to you. I think for people coming through a 2-year program, like I said, it's a little bit more than the 2-year program that you should focus on, but it's also, to me, like, what does this do for you afterwards? What is the network? What are the peer cohort that you are kind of be interacting with? What will they be doing? And I think HBS has that just in spades. The other thing that we have developed, and I don't know when it started, I think as we started to grow in terms of momentum and the number of African students and students who are interested in Africa grew, we've developed really a good community, which I alluded to a little bit before in saying that wherever I am, I'll find a classmate or I'll find a prospective student or somebody coming through who will speak to me, and that really is true. So you've seen it. You're in Lagos, you're in South Africa. There are a ton of people that will show up from different classes and will talk to you about your interests, be it where to go clubbing tonight, or be it something a little bit more serious, like I'm thinking about starting this type of business, help me get into it. So I think for us, that is really the thing that at least binds me to coming back and doing panels like this.
There's specific coursework at HBS that differentiates the focus on Africa versus other schools like Stanford or Oregon?
So coursework that I saw at HBS that was particularly useful, we actually started bringing a number of cases. So you just did one, Angola. I think there's another one that just came out that the VIPs are doing tonight. So our professors, I think, started really pushing in terms of what they were publishing, which again, other schools have gotten into, but given the amount of cases that HBS publishes and other business schools use, that to me was a sign that classmates of mine who had never considered ever going to the continent were sitting in a classroom with me reading about Nigeria, for example. Was a great moment. Like, we all dressed up for that day. So we literally dressed up, brought jollof rice, super excited. But so the cases that we published, I think there are a number of other partnerships and alliances that we have that I didn't get involved in during the 2 years, but maybe you could speak to, Irene.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that because I've actually been leading an effort on behalf of the Africa Business Club this year to get more Africa cases in the curriculum, especially in the required first-year curriculum, where every single person in an entire class does every single case. And we went through and actually had a process of engaging every single course head of the first year curriculum, so all 10 course heads, and spoke to them about about putting more Africa cases in the curriculum and helping them see the perspective of in an entire RC curriculum with several hundred cases that everybody reads. To Josh's point, I think this is an area where HBS should be doing more, and we should be pushing them to do more. And as a club, we brought to their attention that there were 10 cases in the RC curriculum, the required curriculum in the first year. There's a lot more in the second year, so there's courses like Globalization in Emerging Markets or Managing International Trade and Investment, where the Angola case is taught. There's a case on Liberia. There's a case on Lesotho. So there's more in the EC, but we wanted everyone to have, as a part of their basic experience, really an understanding of a wide variety of business and government and public policy and leadership situations in Africa. And the great news is a lot of the RC course heads have been incredibly enthusiastic about the effort, and we've had multiple case writing efforts with members of our club and really senior faculty this year. And so Josh has actually been co-authoring a Dangote case that we expect to be taught in the first year strategy course next year. And there's multiple other efforts. Nando's Chicken is another one from marketing. And so, all kinds of industries, all kinds of perspectives, and we're hoping to enhance that. And we see a lot of buy-in from the faculty to doing that.
Can you discuss more engagement for Africa-related affairs on campus and through Harvard in general that you've experienced during your time here?
Sure. Yeah, there's as Amaka mentioned, there's a really vibrant community, and that, I would see it for you guys primarily interested in the business school as sort of concentric circles where, there's a really vibrant community on campus of African students and those like me really interested in the continent. But there's also other concentric circles where, we, for example, have a ton of friends at the Kennedy School who are African or are really interested in Africa, the law school, the Graduate School of Design, the education school, and even to Harvard College. There's a lot of really young, enthusiastic people who, and we as a club set up a mentorship program to get them engaged and get them thinking career-wise and academics-wise early on about that. And so it's a really multivalent sort of interaction. And I think one that also cuts across the social part of it, the research part of it, and the sort of organizational part of it. And so, there's social gatherings all the time, formally organized by various clubs and informally organized by groups of students. But there's also a ton of just research and ideas, and that's a great opportunity for engagement. And so the fact that President Kagame actually right before this was the protagonist in an HBS class. So this is a private class at HBS where the president of a country showed up and was the case protagonist. That happens. At the Kennedy School, there are multiple heads of state hosted every year, including the president of Niger last year. At various levels, like we had the head of the IMF Africa group at the Kennedy School earlier this year do a hugely oversubscribed talk. So there's lots of just ways to engage with the research and the ideas. And then in organizational aspects, so startups, venture competitions, entrepreneurship, NGO creation. I mean, there's lots of people getting involved while they are at Harvard in different ways, actively on the ground, and there's lots of opportunities to engage with that as well.
Amal, can you add on, you mentioned this network post-school, so this is a 2-year investment, but it's more, you said 30-year, 40-year, 50-year horizon. So
Yeah.
can you go a bit more into how you're starting to experience that and how the engagement continues after school?
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways that I've seen it really play out. One is in the type of jobs that you do immediately after school, right? So I'm at McKinsey now. I'd say a good 50, 75 people of my members of my 900 people class are at McKinsey at this point in time. So there have been projects where there have been at least 4 of us, and this is African and non-African. So I think where you work, having that kind of initial 2-year set of people that you start with is one way. Another way is literally just socially. You begin to find that your social circles become smaller and smaller. So grew up in England, will bump into people in New York who worked with me in London and are German, married to Algerians. That type of thing happens. And then some of it is also really, I think that the HBS African group make a consistent effort to keep in touch. So my class, for example, I know that the guys in my class have a nickname. I'm not going to shout what the nickname is for them, but they have their own like WhatsApp group. They have, I think, at least biannual calls. I make a point of speaking to my colleagues who've moved to Lagos and Joburg at least once a year, like every January. In between that, we're in touch. Ironically, everyone gets married like in a rush after HBS, so you will have a ton of weddings from different places. So that is, it's expensive, I'll point that out now. So that is kind of the immediate how the 2-year network has continued. I think in terms of other year groups and alum, that is something that you can persistently, that you drive a little bit, right? So I've been at McKinsey for a bit. I'm interested in maybe doing some work in our Lagos office. We have a couple of APs coming in to do some work, and I've been in touch with them. I've been helping them kind of put together our effort for the conference. So I'll sit down with them this weekend and like really drive the conversation. How would I make the move? What should I do? What should I prepare myself for? I think some of the even older alums, again, that's you really driving, they are very much open door policy. So I think what you put into the network, you really get out, would be my takeaway.
That's helpful. Shifting gears onto more of a non-Africa focused theme, what are your, how do you think the case methods contributed to your overall learning, and do you find it beneficial and productive? Because that's a fairly unique idea of HBS. Maybe describe what the case method is as well.
Sure. So I'd encourage all of you, if you get the chance today, to link with well, I guess it's hard to sit in on a class.
I guess I'm having a mock class. Everyone here will be in the mock class after the case. Oh, so
right.
Everyone knows.
Yeah. So I encourage everybody to go. To be honest, I was sort of on the fence about the case method when I got here. I was sort of in the camp of like, oh, it'll be great for like strategy class, but maybe not so great for accounting. Like, how the heck do you teach accounting using a case method? Like, there is a clear right and wrong way to do accounting, and the wrong way could land you in jail. So, like, let's be clear about this. And I was really shocked when I came for my interview on campus. I actually sat in on an FRC class, which is the first semester accounting class. And I was shocked by how engaged people were, how well prepared they were, and how like real hard accounting rules were being taught in that class. And my first year, last year here, I had an amazing accounting professor, and of course, it was case method, and I felt like I learned accounting probably better than I would have. It's hard to know the counterfactual, but I felt really engaged in a way that I don't think I would have felt if it were sort of a standard undergrad style like lecture class, in part because it always puts the concepts in context with the business situations that call for them. And so you always understand, okay, why is this concept important? It arises in these real situations. They're not theoretical. They're never theoretical. They're always rooted in the decisions that you have to be thinking about as a business leader. And they make a real effort to put some cases in there that are really exciting. So like everything from like Netflix to Nordstrom. I mean, they go out of their way to really illustrate the concepts in a context that you can really find engaging. So I've been pleasantly surprised by the case method, especially positively, like a delta from where I expected in the harder accounting, finance types of courses. I do think, though, that it requires a lot out of you as a student, like especially second year, second semester. Like you can tell sometimes when everybody comes to class and it was a late night for everybody and no one really read the case, and it's really easy to disengage. And by now, like, we've read hundreds of cases, and it does really require sort of stamina as a student to stay consistently engaged and prepared, because the class is only as good as how everybody is prepared and how everybody is willing to put time and energy into it in the moment.
And a core part of the case is the section itself. And can you talk more about the section and the section experience, and going forward how that's turned out after school?
So I would say I was similar to you a little bit, like, this case method thing is interesting. I very much enjoyed sitting in on a class, but how that was actually going to play out for the 2 years, I don't think I thought about that until I arrived. I'm in a room and everyone's talking, mostly American. So everyone's talking, very colloquial, non-stop talking, and I'm like, I can't believe I signed up for this. 2 years of talking. And you're aware at the back of your head that you need to talk for your grade. So for me, the first term was definitely a little bit stressful. And it took me a while to, I think, really see the value of the case method, particularly for things such as accounting, since I'd come from a background where there was a right or a wrong answer and a very precise answer that had decimal places. And this was a very, like, it depends. I was also a scientist by background, so completely different from what I had anticipated. The real value that I found from the section experience and the case experience was getting a perspective that I would have never considered before. So, like I mentioned, we have this case in Nigeria. How does my classmate who grew up in Kentucky and is in private equity and is going back to private equity in the middle of the country think about the growth prospects of Africa? What is his perspective? Like, what is really behind his hesitance to invest? Why would he call this risky? So if I'm going out and I'm pitching an idea, what is it that's in his head that I need to get past, right? So if I decide in 5-10 years I'm going to raise a fund, I'm super excited, this fund is all Africa women's based, and I go out and I go on a roadshow, what is that investor thinking that I had previously not thought about because it was my blind spot, right? So I think for me that was incredibly valuable, and I think that the section commits to being one, prepared, which is huge, so nobody will come to your class, at least for first year, unprepared because it's risky, right? So being prepared and engaged, but also I think because you start to bond as a section, everyone comes prepared to be open. And you really don't get that in the real world. People prepared to be open and share, well, actually, I really think that I'm not investing in Nigeria because I think they're lazy. That's a statement that you would never expect someone to say, but I appreciate it because now I understand it, and I understand what I'm dealing with in the world when I'm seeing people not seeing things the way I am. This is because this is where they grew up. This is their perspective. I think HBS has the potential not only for you to hear those perspectives, but also for once in an adult's life potentially change those perspectives, right? So by the time you're 25, 26, your worldviews are pretty formed, I actually think. I think your views on, the West, why the West is doing well, that type of thing, there aren't many options and avenues for you to change that. I think HBS, by having such a diverse section of classmates who actually have some commonality in wanting to learn, pushes you again to really start thinking, okay, well, that's what I previously thought, but now having read this case and having met Irene, who's worked there, and met this person, I actually will consider investing in this place because the fundamentals are strong and my perceptions about the people are wrong. So I think those two things for me are really invaluable, and you will not get anywhere else.
That's helpful. Yeah, so I think we're going to open it up unless you guys have any other closing ideas that we haven't covered yet, but let's open it up and see if there's any questions.
So I find it interesting that you mentioned that there's someone coming in from private equity and doing HBS
Okay, so the first question, which is it common to go back to what you did before? Not that common. I think most people are looking to switch. But there is a quotient of people who came, who did something, like I said, private equity, or maybe they were in industry, who came to HBS really to become a broader leader and go back to that field. And that's absolutely fine. I think it makes sense. There's a large section of people who are looking to switch. The switch is often, you see a lot of like bankers go to consultants, teachers become consultants, everyone who wasn't a consultant becomes a consultant. The consultants are all trying to be not consultants, but half of them will go back for at least 2 years because they're obliged to. And then after these 2 years, which is where I'm about to hit, you begin to see widespread decisions being made about what people really want to do, having had these 2 years of learning and then 2 years in the world to test out a little bit of what did I learn, what do I like, what do I not like. Some of the research that I've read suggests a lot of people end up actually in management positions in companies, which makes a ton of sense, and which is why we have such a diverse group of alum to actually kind of bring to speak today, for example. But the straight out of business school path looks pretty similar, and then that's when people start making life decisions.
Question about faculty. So I know we've spoken a lot about the alumni network and folks are doing some really interesting things in Africa as far as alumni goes. But I'm wondering on the faculty side, is there any precise thought leader when it comes to Africa on faculty for those people, and what kind of research can we Google to see what they're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. The exciting thing is there's more and more faculty interest in Africa, but I have to be honest with you that it's from the business school side, it's starting at a pretty low base. But I'll give you some of the highlights. So this year there's actually a field course taught by Professor John McCumber, who is an infrastructure expert, and he led a group of students that Josh was a part of to Tanzania and Ethiopia. Specifically looking at multiple sectors of infrastructure development and opportunities for the private sector to work with the public sector to develop infrastructure in those contexts. That was wildly successful. Like it was, I think, the most so you rank your course selections, and that was the most oversubscribed course this year. And he's now getting into doing all sorts of research about infrastructure in the global south in general, but in Africa in particular. The dean of Harvard Business School, Nitin Noria, has committed to leading a faculty trip to Nigeria, and he's expressed interest in actually personally going on that, and so we expect a lot more faculty research coming out of that. That said, though, there is not, at the moment, there are no faculty who specifically focus their research only on Africa. And so I think one of the things that you guys have to think about, especially the Africans in this room, is if you come to HBS, this is an area where even while you're a student, I would encourage you to think about exerting leadership and thinking about, what can you do to make this institution reflect all of the exciting things that are going on the continent. And that could be writing a case about an African leader or an African company while you're here. It's encouraging faculty to do research. So I'm working with faculty who are mentoring me to do original research on Chinese investment in Africa. There's lots of opportunities to do that, but I think life isn't fair, and I think as students sometimes you have to fill the gaps, and there's a lot of openness to doing that, but I think it's a reality that we're starting still from a pretty low base, and we're trying to build up from that.
We still have Field 1. Some trips some students go to Ghana. So Field 1 is in South Africa as well. It is a program, and Morocco is what that's expanded. So that started, I think that was the second year of it. Field 1 is a program that is designed to kind of accentuate your learning in the classroom, and I don't know if you guys covered it. It's actually worth covering Field.
Sure.
So the RC year is you have your core curriculum, you've got 5 classes in the first term, 5 classes in the second term, and then they brought in Field, which runs parallel. Field 1 is really around, I think it was team building activities. It's a really interesting set of things to do when you just arrive. So we have activities like the Everest Project, which is how do we take everybody up the mountain? It's virtual. This is when you discover who in your classmates would throw you off the mountain if you're the sixth person. Really great to learn who's your true friend. So you do that for the first term. Then over the break between autumn and spring, you go on some sort of business trip where you go and consult, usually in an emerging market. So in my case, I went to China, a city called Qingdao, and helped out at a mechanics for like a week and a half. And a lot of teams go to Ghana, and they were saying Morocco now, and South Africa. So that's also some great exposure for people who hadn't done anything in Africa. And then the third term is you build some sort of business. So you get some money from the school, you work with a group of section mates, and you devise some sort of concept. And hopefully run it. And actually some of my classmates have just received funding for some of their projects, which is pretty cool, 2 years out of school. So.
I just had a clarification question about how the case studies are run. So I know you mentioned that the protagonist comes to the class. Is that common, or is that, do they usually come to the class to kind of help them with the teaching?
Yeah, it happens, I'd say in the first year for about like a fifth or a sixth of the cases. And so probably every week you're going to have a case protagonist, and they run it very strictly. So the case protagonist sits literally in one corner and is not allowed to say anything, and the class proceeds as usual. And you analyze their decisions and the context and whether they did a good job, and they're not allowed to say anything. And then in the last, typically 20 minutes or so, they get a chance to respond and say whatever they want, and then they have to take questions from the class. And people raise their hands and they, ask directly. Sometimes they challenge their decisions. Sometimes they ask questions about other things. And these are pretty high-profile people. They're CEOs, presidents. Very occasionally, I don't want to give the impression that like heads of state drop by all the time, but CEOs, CMOs, COOs do, entrepreneurs, other sorts of leaders, and so in your section, your first year, because there's 10 sections. Some sections get it simulcast to them, the guests simulcast into them. So you always see the guest, but out of the guests, you get approximately 1/3 of it, and the guests go back to back to back 3 times, so that all 3 time slots of that class get to see the guest as well.
I want to highlight an example of this. So we had, because I think it brings light to the situation of this unique environment as well. We did a JCPenney case, and the CEO of JCPenney was sitting in the classroom, and it was a case on leadership, and we were discussing where he failed as a leader, and he was there the whole time. And halfway through, the investor behind the transaction, Bill Ackman, who's a big hedge fund guy, walked in, and he sat there, and they hadn't interacted since the debacle of him being fired and everything. And we analyzed his failures in leadership, and at the end, he said, "Yes, you're correct. This is where I failed, but this is where you didn't highlight." And people are taking these like really meta perspectives and analysis to both themselves and their fit within companies. And then the guy who fired him came and spoke and said, "This is where I agree with him. This is why we fired him. And this is why we think he failed. But we think he's a good leader in all of these aspects." And people are able to really take these holistic approaches to themselves and to others. And I think that the school pushes you, in a sense, to do that. And it's in a very productive way.
I have a question about the joint degree program. I know you had a specific research topic heading into it, but if you don't, do you find that the following both tracks can be quite disjointed, or is there a way to have a very holistic experience where you really build off of both schools? Sure.
I'll answer very briefly because I realize a large section of the room isn't considering this, and I'm happy to talk afterwards. But the joint degree program with the Kennedy School in particular is very well structured. It's a formal program between the 2 schools. You do have to apply separately, but they set it up so that there's actually a class that runs through the entire 3 years just for the joint degree HKS, HBS students. And most people who go to professional schools don't come in with like a weird research topic in mind. And I think the people that end up doing the Kennedy School and the business school, our commonality is not kind of we want to do research. Our commonality is the really deep-seated belief that to solve the big challenges of the world, we need to have a deep understanding of both how the public sector works and the private sector, and that these two sectors, in order for us to solve those challenges, cannot be in antagonism with each other. But happy to chat more.
What are some of the typical career paths that lead to Africa after HBS that you saw published from your classmates, and maybe even some of those?
So there are a couple, right? So there were a couple of people who go straight out of business school and have done some really interesting and amazing things. So some have gone and found roles that are operating roles. Some have gone and done things like work for rockets, so they are like CEO of a company effectively. Some have set up their own things and are like currently going through it. So one of our classmates is trying to set up a tomato paste farm or plant in Nigeria and is now in her second set of crop, and fingers crossed she has a ton of stuff to produce this year. So you have a group who just go straight and see how it works out for them. And often some of them had never been before, so this is actually really quite brave. Then you have, I think, the majority of people who may do some experience abroad. So you have some of us who are in New York at the moment or in London. London, New York are kind of the most typical and are doing something a little bit more traditional and gaining experience during that time that we think is helpful to either launch something or to go back and be in one of these type of operating roles. So does that kind of answer your question? Those are the two paths that I've seen so far.
Yeah, with the first group of people, you said kind of like operations roles.
Mm-hmm.
So is that typically they'll join like a large company and just find a general manager?
Yes. So like one of my classmates went to work for Dangote that we mentioned, and that took like a while, but she interviewed with them pretty extensively and knew the type of role that she wanted. So found that role after school, has enjoyed it. Another classmate I mentioned is at Rocket, which is the internet startup, and went to Ghana. She's Nigerian, but she's there operating a couple of holding companies and doing really, really well, killing it. Saw her over Christmas, that's what I'm talking about. Some others also did things in kind of e-commerce. I think who else? Some went into finance, so private equity. I would say that the search for a job and the right role on the continent took a little bit longer than if you were looking for something here. But everybody who has found something has been, I think, far more satisfied in some respects, because I think they can see the impact of what they're doing, and it's pretty immediate as opposed to the delayed plan of I'll get some more experience here and maybe do a little bit of stuff on the side, because there isn't a side hustle with many of these out-of-school jobs.
And just one more follow-up, if it's okay. So the people who, I get the point where it's a little bit more difficult to find exactly what you'd be looking for in Africa.
Yeah.
Is that really a testament then to the network that they were able to find that specific role,
Yeah.
where they come in campus anyways?
No, so that is mostly the network search. I would say that we have, so this fair is like a great place, the career fair tomorrow. You'll see a lot of people, a lot of companies represented, but otherwise in the standard kind of recruiting efforts, we have a few, but not a lot of African companies. A lot of the ones that we have maybe have an alum there, and so they're making sure that they're posting jobs. The network search, as we call it, is how most of them went, which is maybe they went through the alumni database. We have a ton of other databases that the career service will help you access, and they reached out to everyone during their second year or their first year and individually spoke to them and found those opportunities. But the good thing I'd say is our career services are really expertised in doing this and will really help you with it. So you're not alone.
I have a bit of a two-part question. Could you talk a bit about class sizes and how much interaction or individual interaction you have with professors, and also kind of what the curriculum structure or the requirements are for a degree?
Sure.
So the class sizes your first year is 90 odd students in every section. You have every single class together, other than Field 2, which is the one that Amaka mentioned, where you all go to a different developing country around the world. So you're not with your section for that. You're wherever you preference going. And your second year, the class sizes get a little bit smaller for some of your classes, but they're never below, I'd say 50 or so for the smallest classes. And most of them still end up somewhere between like 70 and 90. Your second year, you do also have the option of taking at least, is it 1 or 2 classes at a cross-registered school? So that's at any of the other Harvard schools or at MIT as well. So I have a good friend that went and took an aerospace industry class at MIT, which he really enjoyed. What was the second part of your question? Sorry.
It's like the structure of the curriculum.
Oh, right. Okay.
Second year, right?
Yes, you can also do independent projects your second year. So I'm doing one now with a professor I'd really admired for my first year. And those are self-generated topics that you're willing to put a lot of time and energy into. And you get one-on-one mentorship with your professor. You could also do them as small groups. So oftentimes people do them in groups of 2 or 3. But that topic and that program is individually decided with your professor. Professors will also do IPs with you if you're interested in doing a startup. So people actually, if they're trying to start a business, they'll do that as an IP and get HBS credit for it. The structure of the curriculum, the first year, there are 10 classes that everybody takes, plus field, which is the course that Amaka mentioned that spans the entire year. You have no choice over, there's no course selection your first year. The second year is completely the opposite. You have 100% freedom over what you do and what you take. There are also multiple field-based courses in the second year. And so I mentioned the one that went to Tanzania and Ethiopia. There were also ones that went to China, another one that went to Korea and Japan this year, another one that went to the UK and Netherlands. And I think that selection will expand every single year. And in addition to the case-based courses, there's also more experiential courses, so labs where, like, for example, there's a healthcare one where everybody works directly with a healthcare organization to almost in a consulting sort of way to solve a problem. And there's other like invention-based courses where they pair you up with, for example, an engineer or a scientist from the graduate school, and you work on developing a business idea together. So everybody has the same first year experience and the same common base, and then your second year is like kind of go at it, do whatever you want, and see what you can make happen.
So for those of us who are looking to apply to school either this fall or next fall or years to come, what are some of the things that you wish you knew or some pieces of advice that you would give us in terms of selecting a school, whether it's HBS or not, but really understanding why you want to go, when you want to go, and where you want to go.
For me, I always try to ask people to think about that first part of your question, why do you want to go? Because I think, especially coming from banking or consulting, like there's this time when everybody in your class is applying to graduate school and you're kind of like, okay, maybe I should apply for graduate school. Don't do it for that reason. Wait until you have a really specific, good reason that you can articulate to yourself, because this experience is too short and too expensive not to do that for yourself. And I mean, this experience is also so fun. I mean, there's just so many things that you can fill every single part of every single day with, between classes and, fun events, amazing speakers, cocktail hours, dinners, parties. I mean, you just, unless you can articulate what is the reason for you to be here, like a personal reason that you deeply believe in, and you're going to find at the end of this 2 years that you would have looked back and you would have been really busy and had a really great time, but you will wonder what you got out of it for yourself. And I think by having that thing when you come in here, you can then parse all the amazing things that are going on in the jumble of things and find the thread where you get the most out of it, and you can build a complete experience that's meaningful for yourself. So I would say, I waited 6 years between undergrad and coming back to school, and that was a great choice for me. I have classmates that knew exactly why they wanted to be here after 2 years between undergrad and school, and that's great. But I just think, don't feel time pressure Like, wait until you're actually ready, and then you will be able to get the most out of this experience.
I'd 100% agree with that. I think if you don't have a rationale and a filter for what you're doing here, you could actually come out of business school, I think, a little bit more lost than you expected. I have a couple of colleagues who are coming into business school starting in August, and we're all giving the exact same advice, which is really be clear about how you spend your time and why you're going. I think the one other thing I really wanted to add, and I nearly forgot, is as you're approaching the application process, to have some perspective. I think the application process, particularly because you're working at the same time, can become very daunting. I think there are a lot of other voices telling you where you should go, where you should apply, this is the best place. I think that your rationale for going to business school may not even align to like the place that you think you should apply, right? So if you want to come to business school because you want to become a fantastic operator in a deeply natural resources based company in Angola, maybe this isn't like the best, right? So I think you need to have the rationale, but I also think that as you're going through that process, like have some perspective, talk to different people, but do not drive yourself nuts. Like whatever will be, will be. I think if it's not here, it's somewhere else. You can probably meet that objective. And I want you all to be really clear of that because I've just seen too many people apply and it just becomes this long, long process, and really it should be enjoyable. It's actually a great way to learn a little bit more about yourself by being forced to put on paper what the rationale is and what the rationale is for everything that you've done to date. You will be shocked at what you learn about yourself and whether or not this is even the right step. So that would be my one like golden piece of advice. Please like put the whole experience into perspective. It's fantastic, but it's not the be-all and end-all.
And I might just add a bit to that because like going into it, I didn't know anyone at HBS, and looking back on it, the advice I give people, and who once I started coming to Prospective, people gave me was make sure your whole application process fits the story. Make sure like you have a cohesive story and work through that story. But I think what the school enjoys, or I don't know for sure from applications, but what I've been told and what I tell others is it helps to have a clear perspective of like long term, like what you want out of this experience, why what you've experienced so far is indicative of this pursuit, and just making this into a holistic model and having the recommendation letters fit into this, your interview fit into this, your essays fit into this, and just this cohesive narrative of a sort of bigger picture, and being able to step away, as Samantha mentioned, and see that.
So I do have a question. What's the interaction of the HBS with the other professional schools, like maybe the School of Public Health, the medical school? A lot of us do have like different backgrounds, and I'm just wondering, I know the first year is fixed in terms of curriculum, but the second year, can you like go take courses in those schools and have them like count towards your degree?
Yes, you can. You have to make the effort to research that. There's a lot of resources in the wider university, but yes, you can take courses at other schools. You can cross-register and have that count towards your HBS degree. There's also a ton of ways to engage with students and professors at other schools. So there's like listservs that you can get on at the medical school, at the School of Public Health, or any of the graduate schools where you can see all the talks that are on campus. All of the schools essentially have an open door policy. Like if you're a Harvard student, you are welcome at any of the talks or events. I do think that you do need to make an effort to do that, because they're not going to be the talks that are on the HBS screens floating on campus, right? So you need to go out and find those listservs and get on them. It's not hard, but you know, some HBS students, because we're on this side of the river and the rest of Harvard is on the other side of the river, some HBS students, especially in the first year, don't make it a point to actually walk across that river. So you have to actually take those steps in the dead of winter and do that. But it can be a really rich part of your experience.
If you were to do one of these joint degrees, what do you do in your first summer afterwards? I mean, I feel like a lot of internship programs are geared towards a full-time offer afterwards. So how did that play out?
Well, I think Josh has actually an incredible story of
Do I?
call him out.
No, I think it's an opportunity to experiment on something you've never done before. So I had never lived in the Middle East. I wanted to work in Africa, so I worked for a multinational conglomerate based in Dubai, building out a foundation in Africa. And then I went the second half. I worked with the African Union, and then I guess it was second, third. Okay, I did.
It was an endless summer.
And then I spent like 3 weeks just in Ethiopia, exploring the landscape and going and meeting with government officials and business leaders and just knocking on their door and asking them how the landscape is, because I was interested. And people were responding to my emails and calls, and if not, I was there until they did respond. But it was just a really interesting summer of just a lot of information collection, seeing what actually I enjoyed. And then my next summer, I thought I wanted to do private equity in Africa. Back to careers, I had done private equity in Africa before, so I was like, I want to do, or I did private equity before, but I wanted to do private equity in Africa after. Then I did that, and I realized, no, this isn't what I want to do. So I went to a portfolio company of a private equity firm, and you're able to do these iterations through the summer because it's a bit more non-traditional going into the Africa realm. You don't have these core internships of like 100 different internships, like this is what you do to get here, this is what you'll do afterwards. You only have a few. You have McKinsey, BCG, maybe a few of the PE firms, but like for the most part, like the internships you're going to do are not that career driven necessarily. They can be if you want to make it that way, but it's a way to iterate on yourself and your career trajectory. Internships have become a very big thing for us. I think a lot of people who've never worked in Africa tried an internship in Africa last summer. Probably 15 people who interned in Africa last summer had never worked there, who had worked at PE in the States and going back to PE in the States, but they want to see what Africa's like. So they are very interested in exploring these opportunities. So from that perspective, I think the internship is an amazing experience for both people who have a lot of experience on the continent and those who don't.
My question is to any of you is why do you think Harvard Business School selected you or admitted you?
And
and why did you also accept the admission?
That's an interesting question. So I think this goes back to the question that this lady asked, which is really the application process, and Josh's answer about your story. I don't think it's make your story. I think writing your story and being able to articulate it, and the school being able to see that, yes, this person can contribute to our community, and we can also help elevate this person's career. It's like a two-way thing. That usually, to me, seems to be the best type of interviews and tends to lead to admission, right? Because your story is really like shines through. It's clear. It's not contrived. It's your story, and the school can see that you actively want to be part of the community and would really benefit from the education and come to class prepared. So that's as close as my answer I can get on that one. I don't know anything else. Why I decided to come to HBS. So for me, I think I mentioned the community. I think I came to this event. I remember coming to the Prospective Students event about 5 years ago. I felt that everyone that I spoke to was interested in helping me on my journey, regardless of whether or not it was coming to HBS or not. Every student I was in touch with had half an hour to spend with me. I didn't necessarily see that at other business schools. I mentioned a little bit of the network being a little bit deep. So for me, if I'm going to go do something in Lagos, I'd like to be able to call up a classmate and problem solve how to move forward with my business, and HBS had that. I think those are like the main winners for me. I also just felt comfortable here. It's kind of like England, like cold. The West Coast is really far. Like, illogical reasons going on as well.
I just want to echo Amaka's point about your story and that it being a two-way street. For me, when I was doing my application essays, which I think both of you mentioned, it's a great opportunity to just reflect on where you are in your career and what the next step should be. It was very clear that I had this like really kooky interest that like no one else in the world really had, and I was like, should I be honest about this, or should I cast it in terms that are like, oh, I want to be a leader of, I don't even know what, but like there would have been ways to do it. And in the end, I with the help of some of my mentors, it was clear that I just needed to be honest about it. And that, if this was not the right place for that sort of endeavor, this was a great time to find out before because almost the worst thing is like spending three years in my case and figuring out that this was not the right home for this endeavor. And I think it's also helpful in that, if you're authentic about where you're trying to go, of course that can change, but I think that authenticity also shines through the interview, through every interaction that you have with the people here. And there can be that honest two-way assessment of whether or not this is the right home for you for a couple of years. Because, this is about you also figuring out in the space of your career, is this the right timing and the right place where you can develop the most? And so I'd encourage you to reflect honestly about that and to not get wrapped up so much in the competition and to just see it as if you're telling your story. For me, a couple of things, I echo a lot of things that have been said about the reasons why I decided to come here. The joint degree, to be honest, was a huge part of, I applied mainly to joint degree institutions, so like Columbia, which also has a CEPA, which is their policy school, in Wharton, which has a Wharton Lauder program. But I think the other thing for me, as I said earlier, is the context of the larger university. And one thing that I don't think people have mentioned yet, which is the faculty and how much the MBA program is the core part of why they're here and the core part of HBS. HBS is renowned for its research, but unlike many other schools, the faculty are expected to teach and they're personally committed to teaching. It is a core part of how they're promoted and how they're assessed. And that is very different even from other business schools. Senior faculty teach first-year courses, and the faculty are also not allowed to do research actively in the semesters that they're teaching. So I've never had an experience where you could get half an hour with a faculty member with like no notice, because their doors are always open and you sit down. It's not a 10-minute thing. You sit down and you have a real conversation about what you're trying to do. They memorize everybody's names like for the first week. It is a sort of, and I went to undergrad here. I did not experience that in undergrad here. And that's been a really special mentoring opportunity to be able to find new mentors who I really respect. I know it's not why most people come here, but for me, it's been a really important part of the experience.
We've run out of time. We'll make ourselves available though for a few minutes. I know I can. They may have to run, but please comment. Any additional questions? Please feel free to ask. And again, we're so glad to have everyone here today, and so glad you guys want to apply to this institution. It has, I think we can all say, it's been an incredible experience in our lives and a very impactful one, and we hope to see you guys here in the future. So, thanks everyone.
Thank you very, very much.